Hello, America, the UK, and England. They have collusion with the World Trade Center attack with all different cultures, countries, through other natures of organized crimes they have roles with, and then needs to cover that up. What motivated their roles to it was predicate acts with facts methods that people had self-valued roles with, where and how they had their founders' communications replaced. At England and in America, still, they have other communicated for our founders than they actually communicated. James Madison and the founders behind him. James Madison is the only founder we know the name of because no one had free speech, and everyone had to pretend otherwise. Otherwise, they were censored by the breaching method that had internationally monitored conversations with slavery entrenched northern colonies and southern colonies, and not just through the different countries, international companies, overt criminal enterprises, and private ones, and terrorists originally and still. Witch trials courts. See, in other words, other at the founding locations is communicated about those locations that our founders left declassified for us to understand. That's really why how the infrastructure, modern infrastructure, look at the infrastructure in Iran and in Israel, let alone Palestine. There is no issue, it's already destroyed. See, this is a method that keeps, once you entertain that infrastructure, the suburbs were designed tactically denatured to cause negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures. The only way that the reason people get away with pretending that's debatable is relative to criminally foreign influence, fact, true nature, quality aspects, and denials of it, even though it's recorded. We have black pupils, whites of eyes to discern that. Our founders directed us to blame a human fact, true nature breaching method. That's what their communications declassified communicates for reassigning black pupils, whites of eyes. Nature's communications for it. Only nature has criminal insidiousness nature for nature's demonstrations of it too, not just our founders. In other words, and that's inseparable from what witch trials. They don't leave out what witch trials are about at the same time. Oh, let's do them separately. In other words, and the breaching method against Native Americans. There are proofs too, if you pay attention to how they were using the databases, all criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions wrought, identities of relativity / hyperrelativity to relativity to everyone know that we could trace. Relativity is real. We have black pupils, whites of eyes. There are totally different different individual species bodies made up of a whole bunch of independent individual bodies with that unity and independence of a species body. Simultaneously, nature communicates about independence and unity, distinctly, non-distinctly, simultaneously / hyper-simultaneously. We could discern nature showing us even the syntax needed to be this way. And many pray. But now because of a hyper-unnatural, hyper-archetypal criminal enterprise method with difference /s. So we are different species bodies. Nature is showing us about the species bodies of individual bodies. It's showing us that it's generating an individual identity of value / value progression is not the other species bodies, is not ours, while it is that anyway. And that's how we can discern its identity of value / value progression. And how it's showing us about difference. It's communicating to us about, we're showing difference. Its own. Everything. We have different color eyes and the same color eyes at the same time. America's founders. It is more, I don't even know who said it, but most American, probably every American is the only thing that we all know commonly. Someone said in American history, don't shoot until you see the whites of eyes. See the physics of the wars and of the American Revolution. Descriptions of it. This breaching method measured and maintained the identities of the sciences, including of the military, criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions wrought. Self-valued roles replacing what James Madison had declassified for himself and for our founders. The only one we know the name of is him. But nature itself shows us too, and President slash Chief shows us. They were apportioned. Other things do too. There was no way they had the George Washington and some leftover soldiers didn't have the means to counter those crazy internationally. They had slavery entrenched northern colonies and southern colonies and roles with it. And then America's founders were born. And there were more than 13 colonies. James Madison's plan was to counter-extort and force everyone to have no means to defend themselves from overt criminal enterprises, private ones, members, A through Z, insidiousness, over internationally monitored conversations, again, sickly, distinctly north and south with slavery, even against our own black people's white survival, but also non-distinctly. And rather than counter that, even though it's against every human being, how non-distinctly everyone was hurt by it. In other words, everyone was forced instead to blame other things, others, or selves, rather than appreciate those demonstrations by nature itself about who we are distinctly / non-distinctly. Hurt by the same hyper-archetypal fact-cheating nature breaching method. That's one of the things that's recorded, where and how we're placed, is the inseparable communication system with black people's whites of eyes. And black and white have been reassigned and still being. They have black or white voices and groupings forced entertained. Meanwhile, black and white had collusion and exceptions with what was entrenched here, and then America's founders were born. And they left it classified for themselves. And James Madison, the only one we know the name of, that and how and why they did not have free speech. Why is because there was a human fact-cheating nature breaching method entrenched, and roles with it had to pretend they had free speech to an extent, /s. Otherwise, that body was sensed, including that body was a majority of people, including it was everyone, and that is adapted to any grouping of nations that tries to counter the negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures that the breaching method maintains, but through ourselves, A through Z, the human species body of individual bodies. We are now short words, therefore their protraction definitely prevented. Convictions proper by this hypervolume science. So these people have been shown they need to cover up life progressions. They have time collusions with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and terrorists originally and still, and you need to pretend other. It is concentrated corruption at psychiatry with triages. I've been to the other countries. There are proofs that they have psychiatrists, ones with badges too, with the intelligence agencies at triages in other countries too, for how they have Russians, Ukraine, Americans, Wethersfield police fabricating transcripts with intercities police departments and with Hartford Hospital, fabricating transcripts, fake ties, fake natures of ties to kids and their families, with sexual and medical offenders of kids years apart, first forced, further then and now. In other words, the readings of statutes and precedents regarding what's recorded online, they already changed what's digitally recorded. Whiting forensics has these many countries evolved. In other words, and they have the Connecticut corrections offices and judicial branch offices. Many ways, criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions wrong. They're trying to pretend it's their legitimate roles. Unmarked police forms, pretending to care about other safety because they're leaking this. Get them on paper, one image sequence. Get me off the fake conversations with WFSB News, Channel 3 News. It's also the sources in the intelligence next to Fox Connecticut News and WTNH in Connecticut. And the same ones involved with them in these other countries with predicate acts at the same time. They have roles with the public television people, too, with Russians, Ukraine, their educators, intercities next to the campuses. All sides of Central Connecticut State University in New Britain, Connecticut, is increasingly involved with predicate acts with intelligence from Wethersfield since I was a kid. Identity theft, fraud, slanders. You guys better get them on paper, one name and sequence. Get me off the fake conversations with the news and stop playing games. In other words, they're admitting that they have the criminally pointable, tactically delusions, wrought readings of statutes and precedents. All exceptions, exception nature, they're using the hide. How they already faked exceptions, exception nature. They have collusions with all kinds of drugs and medicines crimes with the intelligence communities. All kinds of evidence is racketeering worse than war crimes. We're going to have to appreciate exception and exception nature as its identity of value progression. That one showing us that it is generating the species bodies. That one showing us that we could discern the body, the only increasing value of the body generating the differences of the seasons used by nature itself to show us Earth's the special difference. In other words, we're about to be where it's too hot or too cold. Not just because it wants to show us warmth. In other words, we're showing the simultaneous / hyper simultaneous. We are distinct from other species bodies, but we are non-distinct from them. And we are simultaneous with them, but / hyper simultaneous is the rest of all things. Vaccines, even if someone invents something, the finite details, the order of the finite, the difference of that, distinctly, non-distinctly, simultaneous / hyper simultaneous, that or how it is the active and or grouped, and distinctly, non-distinctly, simultaneously / hyper simultaneously from how it is the identity of the simultaneous. And like, for example, any subject we could appreciate is individually grouped and simultaneously to an extent. And where and how we could appreciate that of our own appreciation of, to an extent, of what's real always. In other words, it comes with means to discern that which is simultaneously greater than and more finite and with active relativity to everything. Its way, alone, and relative to its roles with a special difference. And it is kept here its way. We could be systems other, we could all agree to be systems other than its own. Hypernated pure, by the way. But it will only demonstrate with negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures, finite, grouped, active, and simultaneous. See all the humanity voicings. They left out black pupils, whites of eyes. They have criminal insidious natures of calmness, criminal and or aggression. And they while they're forcing with that criminally pointable fact, nature, quality aspects of nature, self-value roles with tactically denatured by a human fact, nature, breaching method, a torture, extortion, fact, nature, slavery, therefore physical slavery method, with ground. In other words, everyone needs nuclear energy because the ground, they look at the people and discern that how they don't even fit in the camera. The people inside those huge buildings behind rappers and some of the rap videos. And then when they show the distance, the cities from the distance, everyone's reliant upon food systems, tactical ulterior, and those people, in other words, too, on systems, every job, every industry, every names of the people, the sciences, and know how the beginning of they start debating about religions and start quoting religious books and things like that while they're talking about nuclear things, and they want to be taken serious. In other words, and they don't even bring up right at the word it says only defend right here. For example, with the Old Testament, it says only defend right here, where the names of the people, the sciences will come together, and the part that comes before it. All insanity instead, where they force, it's our religious rights. Then they pretend other people are against religious rights, and we call it their delusions. We call it their criminally pointful and tactically delusions, their sequence shift self-value. That's right at the beginning of the Quran. I mean, the Old Testament. The Quran also has a part too, where it changed everything. If everyone pay attention to what it says. It says all that is important. Is that someone's going to be honest about what they're calling the name of this identity of value / value progression. It doesn't say it like that. I only read it in English. I'm translating that because in another way. But it says all that they're all that matters is if someone's honest about that and even qualifies it by directing the person not to pray in a mosque for the slightest reason. They discern not to. Doesn't say all that's important if someone eats pork or not. It says no. It says all that's important if someone's honest about that that scientific, the name of that scientific value. In other words, the sciences have been abridged since semi-ancient times, since before religious messengers were born. No one had free speech to an extent. Everyone had to pretend other. They had to leave deciphered to be deciphered. And they knew they couldn't. They knew that there would be collusion between the people attacking the religions and the people defending them, defending their uses of their differences. Tactical alter from how nature shows us with its difference, how nature uses difference to show us its own. Not just that they're a different, we are a different species body, or that they are a different species body. It's showing us that and how it's generating all differences. They are individual species bodies of individual bodies, and we didn't invent that. Even about ourselves, all exceptions, nature shows the same thing, /s. And wherever we can discern its identity of value / variable progression to an extent, variably, it comes with its complete identity relationship to itself, and the only increasing value of that. It sends us revelations, answers, communication, not with words. We discern also birds, fish, they have two eyes. They have quality aspects in nature distinct, simultaneously non-distinct, and simultaneously. But again, for that further a distinct identity of simultaneous nature. They have the nature of debate contains quality aspects in nature that can't defend themselves without self-valuing each age and nature of science treatments, fact treatments, with self-value rules of criminally foreign influence, fact treatment nature, quality aspects in nature, and relative delusions. Psychiatry is delusions raw. And some just concentrated rules because the way they are with courts. There are proofs they have psychiatry involved with courts and with prisons. And like Connecticut has a corrections offices and judicial branch offices involved with overt criminal enterprises and private ones and foreign and domestic medical families and the uses of their own differences and others for cover-ups. They're putting fake transcripts. In other words, on a mass scale, judges and prosecutors, their family members speaking fake things into records. Little cowards forbidding writing so they could cover up what they've been doing. With former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, involved interstates and intrastates, intercampuses and intracampuses, with various natures of child abusers and families that were involved with that, and with the elderly homes at the same time, and untimely death at Trinity College. You little cowards with the police in Hartford too, and Wethersfield, colluding with a Darth Vader, with the police. The difference of the police station at or next to the campuses, how they changed that to that, is involved with with remote use, cover-ups of the remote uses of themselves, criminally foreign influence / hyper-criminally foreign influence. The difference of that too. And that's three ways. That's the standing nature of the communist treatments with the voices only allowed to be heard, or with their aggression. In other words, they have readings of statutes and precedents that give them the right to lie for everything. They use that already where they didn't have the right to lie. The names of the people of sciences, including the law, the branches of government, are used remotely, individually grouped and together. Self-value rules of predicate acts with facts, methods, juxtaposed by a method, singular. And so they have criminally foreign influence, tactical delusions, raw takes on why and how there are negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures at cities. In other words, and where they speak about, in other words, in America, the Constitution, the government's not supposed to entertain religion. That's why we have to deal with the nutbags, and we have the right to call them out when they're nutbags. and their criminally foreign influence. Get me off the fake conversation with them. These are child abusers, leaders, and kids with the religious spots and the difference of the roles with the religious spots. I'll show you the ones years apart, first force, because they have interbranch families involved with their kids there. And the foreign ones at the same time. Same punks with the names of their countries and with the names of our own and other people's names. Get me off the fake ties to their kids, too. Get it all on paper with the interbranch. Get me off the fake conversations with WFSB. Fear God, UK, for thinking. Get that on paper, too.